Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, please. Welcome. Apologies for the short delay in us getting started today. Thank you. Thank you for being patient and bearing with us. So hopefully at some stage the live stream should kick in on YouTube and stuff. I have started it, but in the meantime I'll just quickly share my screen on here for you. So hopefully that's come up now. And then hopefully it should come in on YouTube in just a second. Have you had a good week so far, Liz? Cool. Cool. Yay, nice. That's exciting. Birthday in 1 week. Fantastic. Fantastic. Oops. Seeing if I can get to the actual PowerPoint. We'll just do it like that. There we go. Has it gone live on YouTube? Do you know if it is? I'm just noticed the bot hasn't gone up yet. Just take a quick look to see if we've started up on YouTube. Thanks, Joe. Cool. Okay. Nice. There we go. Okay, I think it's just kicking in now, Liz. There we go. It's coming through. Lovely. There we are. Okay. Cool. So, like I said, apologies for the delay in us getting started this afternoon. It was due to just a slight delay in us getting going. Which one is... I'm not quite sure what's going on there, Liz. Let me just reshare it quickly, just in case that is an issue. Sorry about that. Oh, I see. Okay. So, as usual, we'll just start off tonight with the usual introduction. So, as I said, we will make a start now. Again, sorry for being a bit late. So, welcome back to the next TechnoClub session. Tonight, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking a little bit at the concept behind. So I know that we have been mentioning last week about mobile first design and the idea that when we are designing a website, that realistically what we should be doing is we should be focusing on having the website designed so that it works on a mobile phone before it works on a desktop, because mobiles are obviously for a lot of people the main point of contact now for checking websites and things like that. So the idea is that this whole concept of having a website which is built specifically for a PC, the idea of that has now kind of disappeared. And what we're moving into now is this idea of having websites that are designed specifically for mobile phones. So what we're going to be doing tonight is we're going to be having a bit of an introduction. And when I say an introduction, it'll be a very basic introduction to media queries. So it'll be a very, very basic introduction to media queries. So I would suggest if you wanted to do some more sort of advanced media query things, that you can have a Google, because there's lots and lots of resources out there. So if you wanted to have a little bit of a Google and have a look at different resources that tell you how to do media queries, then by all means you can do that after the introduction today. And then we're also going to be doing a little bit of JavaScript, and that's going to tie into what we're going to be doing over the next 2 weeks, or 3 weeks even. Was it 3 weeks? 2 weeks? 2 weeks, sorry. After this week, we're going to be looking a little bit at JavaScript. Okay. The thing that I just want to point out before we actually officially start is about I mentioned a couple last week about the new Techno clubs and Techno live sessions that are going to happen, and we've had a bit of more information. We've sort of been doing a bit more planning, and so there's a little bit more information about those that I can give to you now. So essentially what we're going to be doing is we're going to be having, as I mentioned last week, we're going to be having the Techno live sessions, which are going to be different topics each week, and they will be held on, for me it will be on a Tuesday and afternoon, and there will also be one for there'll also be one that's run by Jack, and that one is going to be held on another day, which I will find out for you. But my session is going to be held on a Tuesday, and then we're also going to be having the Techno Club sessions. So there's going to be a session held by Jack on a Monday, by Cardiff University on a Wednesday, and by me on a Friday. Okay, so and they will be running between 4:30 and 6:30. The Techno live sessions will only be an hour long, and they will be held between 4:30 and 5:30. Now, as I mentioned last week, you don't have to come to both. You can come to one or the other, or you can do both if you want to. That's absolutely fine. The concepts that I will be looking at in the Friday club are most likely going to be slightly more inclined towards things like Scratch, and also to bits that we've looked at in the past like Gamefruit. And Jack's sessions are going to be slightly different, and they're going to be looking at different things again. So again, we're still finalising a few of the details, but I thought I would just let you know sort of what was going on with that, because there have been some updates. So I thought I'd just let you all know what was going on with that. But other than that, we will get started with the live stream. So it's going to be on a Thursday, the Techno live session for Swansea. So the one that's run by Jack will be held on a Thursday. So Tuesdays and Thursdays. So we'll get started on tonight's session. Oh, okay. Did you have internet problems, Riz? Don't worry. I was just discussing what was going to be happening with Techno clubs and Techno live. Okay, so we will again, essentially we're just working out the details, but to just sum up on what I was just saying, we're going to be having Techno live sessions on a Tuesday and Thursday, and they will be on different topics every week. And we're going to be having Techno club sessions, Each one of the TechnoClub sessions will be on a different concept, and then you will get to choose which one of the clubs that you want to be a part of. So there'll be one on a Monday, one on a Wednesday, and one on a Friday. And then you can choose which one that you would like to participate in. The ones that I am going to be holding are going to be on a Friday, and the ones that Jack are going to be holding are going to be on a Monday. And then there's also going to be a session held on the Wednesday by Cardiff University. So once we have a bit more information, we can release to you what's going to be happening on, you'll essentially get to choose which session you want to be a part of, and then you can be allocated sort of into that session. But there will be more information about it in the coming days, okay? So don't worry too much if you missed that. Okay, so we'll make a start then on tonight's Coding Club. So as usual, we'll just do a bit of a recap on what we covered last week. Okay, so the first thing that I want to ask is, can anybody tell me what the purpose of a class is in the context of web design? So we talked about classes briefly last week. Does anybody know what a class is? Yeah, so you can use them to name divs in CSS, absolutely. So the main purpose of a class is to essentially give a section a particular name so that it can be styled in CSS. Yeah, absolutely it is, yeah, or any tag. So you can give anything a class. It's recommended that you don't use classes too much if you can help it, but if you can use a class, then it's because you need something to be styled in a particular way, then you can do that. So it's used to give a section a particular name so that it can be styled in CSS. Okay. So the next question I have: can anybody give me one unit of measurements that's used in CSS? So that's what we use to change the size of something, or yeah, absolutely it is. Pixel, percentage, yeah, absolutely. You've also got EMs, so relative to the parent size. We've got PT for points. Okay, so for the font sizes and things like that. Those are well done. Yeah, spot on. So the next question is, does anybody know what an aside is used for? Or not what it's used for, but what it's most commonly used for, I should say. Any suggestions? What's an aside used for? So it's like that, or like what's it most commonly used for? Yeah, so it could be used for so it's for content that would typically go maybe to the side of the screen. Okay. Lovely. And then finally, what is the difference between an active and a hover? So we used these a little bit last week. We had actives and hovers. It's the last question. Oh yes, I can see this. You've put a sidebar for widgets and articles. So you can have articles can obviously have their own tag, but an aside is commonly something that would be placed sort of to the side of your screen. And a hover is what happens when you hover over a link, and an active is when you as you're clicking on it. Yeah, absolutely. So as you are clicking on a link, it's what happens as you are pressing it. What happens once you have actually, as you are clicking on it and it becomes active, what happens to the link. So absolutely, well done. So Well done. That was great. So what we're going to be doing, as I said today, is looking at this concept of mobile first design and how that plays a role in web design, okay, which is what we've been doing over the last few weeks. So as I mentioned at the start of the stream, the purpose of mobile first design is so that we don't constantly end up with things that look like this now. So what we've got here is an example of an old sort of version of Wikipedia, okay, on I have no idea what type of phone that is, but it's very much there, and as you can see, that would have been a mobile, something like a mobile site, okay. It is an old phone, yeah. So it's kind of like a mobile site, so you can see how it's been designed to look kind of, well, it's been structured so that it's easier for you to navigate through on a mobile phone. But the idea that we have today is that your website would, because of course if you look at Wikipedia on that phone versus how Wikipedia looks on your computer, they would look completely different, yeah? So the idea is that when you are using a mobile phone, that the website looks somewhat similar to what it would do if it was on an ordinary computer. So these are some screenshots that I took from 3 of my devices. Okay, so I'm a student at Bangor University. We have recently had a new website, but these are some screenshots that I took from my MacBook, which is the big one in the middle. Then I had one on the right is from my iPad, and the one on the left is from my iPhone. So this is actually our older website now. We have had a new website since then. However, what you can see is that across all of the devices, the website looks very, very similar, okay? But we can see that, you know, on the mobile phone example, on the iPhone example, you can see that we've actually got a burger style menu for the menu bar, okay, because the screen is much smaller. Instead of having that menu bar running along the top of the screen with tiny text for you to click on, where you would be likely to accidentally hit the wrong button, it's squashed it all into a nice little burger menu, so that you can so that it keeps the page looking a lot tidier. Okay, and this is this idea of mobile first design, and you can see that the Bangor's website here does a really good job of keeping the layout and things consistent, whilst also having you know, a similar design across all of the devices. Okay, so this is where the idea of mobile first design kind of stems around, and as I said, I'm going to be doing a little bit of media queries with you today. As I mentioned earlier, the media queries that I'll be doing are very, very basic, okay, because I'm still quite new to web design myself, so I'll only be doing a little bit of kind of like the basic media queries, okay, i.e. things like readjusting picture sizes when the screen gets to a certain shrinks to a certain size, when the window is shrunk to a certain size, and things like that. But that's what I'm going to be doing with you today. So I'm going to now go back to my wonderful website. Okay, so hopefully you should all be able to see that now, either on YouTube or on Discord, that we are now back on my lovely Carnarvon Castle website that we've been seeing over the last couple of weeks. Okay, you can see that it is looking slightly different, but I've not made a huge amount of change since we were last here. So there's lots and lots of different things that we can do, or that we could potentially do, in order to help us possibly make this a bit more suitable for smaller windows. Okay, what I will mention just before we get started is that there is actually a way on Google Chrome to view how your website will look on a mobile device. Okay, and you can do that using the element inspector, which is something that we've of course started to become familiar with over the last few weeks. So to launch the element inspector, as I'm sure a lot of you already know, we right click and we go to inspect, and what you can see is up in this top right, in the right of the screen here, there's this button, toggle device toolbar. Okay, and what that does is it actually loads up the window to display how your website would look in a mobile environment. Okay, so you can see how it shrinks things down and scales things down to work as if it is on a mobile device. Now you can change the type of phone that you have or tablets that you're on using the drop down menu. Okay, so if for an example I have an iPhone 7, okay, I know not the most up-to-date iPhone in the world, but I've got an iPhone 7. So if I wanted to have a look at how it would look on my phone, I can choose iPhone 6, 7 and 8 because they all have around the same screen size, and I can now see that this is how my website would look if I was using it on my iPhone, and you can see that it wouldn't look particularly great. Okay, it would look. I mean, everything is there, but the menu kind of shifts, and it's not ideal. And there are different things that you can do with media queries that can help you restructure your website. So I'm going to give you a basic introduction to media queries. Okay, but then feel free, sort of in your own time, to have a little bit of a Google and have a bit of a look around if you've got the time to do so, as to the different things that you can do using those media queries. Okay, so I'm going to just close down the elements inspector so that we can get back to the main website. So here we are. Okay, so we're going to start off by looking at what we can do in order to get those media queries in place. Now, one thing that I'm going to do is I want the size of my picture of Carnarvon Castle that I've got here. Okay, I would like that picture to be shrunk down when I'm looking at it on a smaller device. Okay, so that I'm not having to swipe through various kind of bits of the screen just to be able to see this whole image, or have to zoom out so that it looks really, really small. I would like my website, okay, to shrink down when my window size is reduced. I want my website to reduce the size of my image so that when I'm in a smaller window, it will display the image as looking smaller, so that it still is kind of contained within the window and doesn't spill over the window. Okay, and we can do that, as I mentioned earlier, using these media queries. Okay, so we'll have a look at those now. So I'm just going to go to the part of my code where the image is sort of roughly housed. So .image1, okay, which is the class of the image. You can see I've specified its height and width already. Okay, but let's just say that when my window is shrunk to being a slightly smaller size, I want my image to also shrink in size. Okay, so what I'm going to do is in CSS, because this is all part of CSS, I am going to now shrink down the size of my image so that it is smaller as my window gets smaller. And we can do that using what's known as a media query. So that's represented using @media. And then we say open bracket, and we have to then say how large the window can be, okay, before the image shrinks. So the one that I use to do this is what's known as max width. Okay, again, this is just a very, very basic introduction, and there's a lot of things that you can do with media queries, but this is just a basic introduction. Okay, so we can use @media max width, and then we can specify exactly what the max width we would like the window to be before the image shrinks. So I'm going to say, for an example, that I want the max width of my window to be 950 pixels, And as soon as my window reaches 950 pixels in width, I would then want the image to shrink down so that I can still actually see it on the website. Okay? And what I will do is I will specify, okay, that dot image1, so we take its class name, okay, is going to have a height and width that's half of what it is when it's ordinarily on the website. Now, it's up to you what sizes you set your image or whatever you want to readjust in size to, okay? But I'm just going to go with readjusting the size of the image, and I'm going to say that it's going to be half the size of what it should be when the image, when the window is shrunk. So you can see that we are doing a little bit of nesting here, okay? So what we're essentially doing is we are taking what we would have just written within the CSS, but we're just saying that at this point here, if the window is less than 950 pixels, then we are going to adjust the height and width. So I'm going to say that the height is going to be, we'll say 75 pixels, which is very tiny, but nonetheless, 75 pixels. And I'm going to say that the width is going to be 150 pixels. So it's much, much smaller. It's going to be quite tiny, actually. But what you can see I'm doing is this was just me defining the image in terms of how big it is, which is as you can see on my screen now. And then down here, all I'm doing with this media query is essentially saying when my window is reduced to being 950 pixels, less than 950 pixels in width, I then want the height and width of my image to change from being what it is originally, which is 150 by 300 pixels, to being 75 by 150 pixels. And that is simply pretty much all you need to do with the media query in order to change its, in order to alter the size of something. So in theory, I'm not sure how well this will come across on OBS, on YouTube, but if I start to shrink my window, you can see that as soon as it goes to less than 950 pixels, the image actually reduces in size, okay, as per what I have told it to do with that media query. Okay, again, this is a very, very basic introduction. Okay, it's a very, very basic introduction, and there are so many different things that you can do with media queries when the website, when your window or size is smaller, when you're on a different device. But that just gives you a bit of an idea, okay, as to the type of thing that you can do using a media query. Okay. So we'll go through another example of something that you can do with a media query. Okay. Which is essentially following exactly the same principle, but what we're going to do instead is we're going to just change the nav bar here. Okay, we're going to change the nav bar. So let's refresh that. Oh, whoops, let me just hit save. So we're going to make some minor adjustments to the nav bar so that things kind of that things change when the window size is reduced. So I'm going to navigate to the point on my website, on my CSS file, which contains the nav bar, which is this point here, and I'm going to essentially say when the nav bar is when the window size is 900, well, let's stick with 950 pixels just for consistency, I want some changes to happen to my nav bar. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the same principle again. I'm going to say at media, max width 950 pixels. So again, we're sticking with the 950 pixels. And then we're going to essentially outline what we want to happen to our nav LIs. Okay, so these are our list items, so the list items that are part of our navigation bar. Okay, so it's kind of like if we just go back to the idea of lists, there are different types of lists. So we've got ordered lists and unordered lists, and of course what we have are list items. So a list item is an item within a list. Okay, so examples of things that we could do with the navbar. Okay, we might want to reduce the padding between each one of, or we might want to keep the padding consistent, or you might want to reduce the padding. So I might say that when the window size is reduced, that the padding is going to reduce to something like 2 pixels. Okay. I might want to make the buttons slightly more defined, so I might add a border style perhaps. Again, this is just a very, very basic example. Whoops. But I might want to add a border style, say solid, and then I might want to make the border color something like, I don't know, let's go with yellow. Okay, again, these are just some very, very basic examples. There's an awful lot more that you could do. And then I might want to reduce their font size. So I might want to say that the font size is actually going to be a lot smaller than what it would be if I was looking at the website in a full window. So I might say, so let's remember 1EM, okay, 1EM is the parent size of the font, so that being whatever the default size of your font is. 2EM would be double that. So it might be that I decide to go with, say, half of the parent font size, so 0.5 EM, okay? And these are all little things that you can do to make adjustments to your window. So if I now shrink down my font, you can see that as I reduce the window size, my image gets smaller and the menu reduces in size in terms of the padding between each button. The font size reduces and it gains a yellow border around each one of the menu items to make them a bit more clearly defined. Okay, and we can see that these same principles also apply if I'm looking at it on the mobile app. Okay, so for the next 10 minutes or so, what I'd like you all to do is have a go at either carrying on with your websites. Okay, so carrying on with your websites, adding content, making adjustments and things like that. And then if you have an opportunity, try and have a go at adjusting your media queries so that you are able to make some adaptations to your website whilst you are looking at it from the perspective of a phone or from a smaller window. And remember, you can check what device, what the website would look like on your devices by opening up the Elements Inspector and then clicking on the Toggle Device Toolbar button, which is at the top of the screen. It's got like what would look like an iPhone in front of an iPad as a symbol, and then you can adjust from the drop-down menu the type of phone that you are on and how it would look on that specific device. Okay, so have a go at that, and then in a little while we'll come back and we'll start looking a little bit at JavaScript. Okay, so in the meantime I'm going to just carry on with my website Not that there's much I don't think I can do to save it to make it any better, but I'll make a couple of changes to maybe make it look slightly better when it's on a smaller screen. I can see first that you've put here in the chat a Nokia with Snake being played on it. I haven't played Snake in a very long time. But it was a pretty cool game. Cool. So remember, if anybody does have any questions, just pop them in Discord, and we'll do our best to answer them. It's because I've specified a font size already. That's not working. The GIF of the person playing Snake and of the cat on the MacBook are playing on repeat on my Discord at the moment. It's quite funny. Yes, I remember there are lots of different websites out there that you can use as a means of having a bit of sort of additional research. I believe the one that we might have brought up last week was the W3. I think it was W3 they're called. Is quite a useful website. I think it was W3 Schools. These are a really good group. Really good. This is a really helpful website, which goes through HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, as well as a whole bunch of other things as well if you wanted. Okay, they've even got their own color picker, which is a little bit more advanced than the one that Google has as well. So lots of different things that you can do. Lots of different things that you can do there. And they have a lot of really helpful different resources. So as I said, they've got some JavaScript things, they've got some HTML things, some CSS things, lots of bits and pieces that you, if you wanted to have a bit more of a read around the subject and you wanted to learn a little bit more about media queries and things like that, okay, then you can do that. Okay, lots of different things that you can do. Again, these are just quite basic media queries that I have covered today. But there are lots of different things that you can do, so I would recommend that you look at W3 schools if you wanted a bit of a look into that sort of thing. Okay. And if we go back to the Visit Wales website again as well, a lot of you might notice that when we shrink the window size down, oops, if we were to shrink the window size down on here, you can see how everything kind of still brings itself back together again. Okay, it fits, everything continues to fit on the screen. Okay, so that's just another example. Tidying that up a bit. Okay, so I would have liked to have given you slightly more time to have a bit of a play with those, but I am conscious of time because it is already halfway through the session because we started off slightly later today. So apologies that I couldn't give you more time than that. But what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to actually having a little bit of more of a look now at JavaScript. So of course this has been what we've been building up to over the last few weeks, is this idea of JavaScript. Okay, so of course we've been building up to this idea of using JavaScript and using it to how we can use it in the context of web design. Because JavaScript is can be quite a useful tool, okay, to us within web design to apply a little bit more functionality to our websites. without it being that essentially goes slightly beyond what CSS is capable of. Now, that's not to say you can build some really, really incredible websites using just HTML and CSS. Okay, you know, having JavaScript is kind of gives you a little bit extra, but that's not to say that you always have to use it. Okay, you can build up some really nice websites, very tidy websites, using HTML, just HTML and CSS. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the presentation just quickly. So hopefully you should all be able to see the presentation on my screen now. And as I said, this is the JavaScript logo. Okay, and what we're going to be doing is we're actually going to be looking now at JavaScript in terms of a little bit of the more basic features. Again, we're mainly going to just be focusing on the basics, but we're going to just go through a few things. Now, I have got a couple of recap questions which are primarily based around when we looked at Minecraft and JavaScript programming in Minecraft during the first week that we did on this set of sessions. Okay, now if you don't remember the answers to those questions, that's okay. Don't expect you to remember some of these things, okay? But I thought it would be a nice idea for us to just try and have a little bit of a recap on what we learnt a few weeks ago, just to see if we can remember. Okay, so the first question that I have got is, can anybody tell me what the word nesting means? Okay, so we've actually covered the concept of nesting in HTML and CSS, but can anybody remember what it means? Okay, if you don't know, don't worry. Yeah, absolutely, it is spot on. So it's putting code inside of code, essentially. Yeah, so it's where one bit of code is contained inside of another bit of code, and you see a lot of that being used in JavaScript. Okay, so yeah, well done. The next question is about variables. So can anybody remember what a variable is? It's okay. Don't worry. I wondered what had happened just then. Something. Don't worry. It's okay. Well, a variable is essentially a space or slot in memory that's used to hold a specific piece of data, and that can change as you go through the program. Okay, so a variable can, if necessary, it can hold the same value throughout the program, or it could be that as you get to the end of the program, maybe the value that's contained within that variable has changed a few times. Okay, so you could think of it as kind of like having, let's just say you've got a storage box at home, and at one point within that storage box you were keeping stationery. Okay, and you had lots and lots of stationery within that box, and you had stationery in that box for a very long time. But then one day You might decide that you want to have books in that box. So you take the stationery out and you put the books in instead. Okay, and that's essentially how a variable works. You can keep it as the same value throughout your program, or you can have the value change as you work your way through the program. Okay, so it's just a slot in memory. And the last question is, what is a for loop? So this is a slightly harder one. We've covered looping before, but can anybody remember what a for loop is? What type of loop a for loop is? So we know that it's a type of loop, obviously. But what exactly does that for loop, what kind of loop is it? Okay, well, a for loop is a loop that will repeat a specified number of times. Okay, so what that essentially means is that when you have a loop, when you've got a loop, there are lots and lots of different types of loop. Okay, so we've got while loops, there are do while loops. Okay, I'm not sure if there are do while loops in JavaScript actually, but if we're thinking of other programming languages like C or C#, okay, there are loops such as while loops, which are loops that can run, if necessary, forever or a set number of times. You've got do while loops, which will check whether a condition is true after the loop's contents has run through once, okay, at least once. And then there are for loops, and for loops will ordinarily they will only run a specified number of times. So as part of that for loops condition, as we'll see in a second, we will have to specify how many times we want that loop to run. Okay, and that's what a for loop does. Now I have a bit of an example here of the code that we took from Minecraft. Now this specific code is similar to what you would see in JavaScript, but of course there's going to be a lot of these elements that you're not going to see in a piece of JavaScript that's used in web design. So of course we're not going to see things like agent.placeDown or agent.setItemStone. Okay, so obviously those sorts of things, we're not going to actually see those within JavaScript, okay, that's used in web design. However, what we will see are some similarities between the way that the code is structured in Minecraft and the way that it's structured when we're doing it in web design. Okay, so what I thought I would do quickly now is go through a little bit of a list of what's actually going on in this bit of code. Okay, so I'll just slowly work my way through what's happening in this bit of code, so that we can look at it and kind of determine what's going on as we're working through it. Now, of course, we start off with player.onChat. Now, again, we're not obviously going to see something like that in web design, but we are introduced to this idea of a function. Okay, so we're introduced to this idea of a function, which is all of this code that's coming down here. Okay, and we can see that we're telling the agent in this case what to do. So we were getting them to teleport to the player, we were moving forward one step, then we were setting down stone. What we were doing actually was we were putting stone into the agent's inventory, into slot 1 of the inventory, so 64 stone blocks into slot 1 of the inventory, and then they were moving up 1 block in height, and then we had these for loops which were all nested inside of each other. Okay, So we were saying let y equals 0, so we were declaring the variable y here and initializing it to have a value of 0. And we were saying that whilst y has a value of less than 5, and then we were saying y++. Okay, and of course, as we know, what y++ means is with every iteration, so every time this loop is run, the value of y will be increased by 1. So therefore, this loop is only going to run a total of 5 times. Okay, and as you can see, what we also have are these different nested loops. So what we've got are we've got 3 loops contained inside of each other. And of course, what we were saying is that we were going to have a building, in this case, that was 5 blocks high. It was going to have 4 sides, and it was going to have 10 blocks to each side. Okay, and this is what we were saying here with this idea of nesting the loops. So the outermost loop was saying we want the building to be 5 blocks high. The second loop was saying that we wanted to have 4 sides to the building, and then the bottommost loop, the innermost loop here, this last for loop, was saying that it was going to be 10 blocks per side. Okay, and you can see that everything is contained within curly brackets. Okay, these little curly braces here, and we use those curly braces to help us distinguish what bit of code is with what goes with what. Okay, and to help us keep a track of the structure of our JavaScript document. Okay, so there's lots of little things that we can do with JavaScript. Okay, this was of course an example of how we could program JavaScript into Minecraft. So again, slightly different, okay, to what we would see in actual web design. However, this is still a very good example of how we nest things and how we split things up using these curly brackets to help us keep a track of what's going with what bit of code. So this opening curly bracket here was obviously tied to this closing bracket down here. So all of this is contained within this for loops structure, etc., etc. Okay, so I know that's not the most interesting of concepts, so glad that you were all able to stick with me with that. So heading back over to my website, okay, I will quickly show you an example. If we go back to this website that we had that I mentioned last week, okay, you can see that what I have is in certain places I have a series of little pieces of JavaScript, okay, that we can use or that we can include on our website. Okay, and these are just some very basic examples. So I've got an alert, which is something that we're going to be looking at in a second. So what happens with an alert is if I click on this button here, it's actually saying, it's asking me, do I actually want to follow that link? Okay, now as it currently stands, there isn't anything tied to it, which is why when I hit OK, nothing actually happens. Okay, but it's like a little warning. We've also got this bit of JavaScript, which is actually asking me, well, it's already sort of saved now, but there is an option to have it ask me what my name is. So when I click on welcome here, it says, please enter your name. So I will say, you know, my name's Dan. Oh, well, we'll change it to test so that you can see how it changes. And if I hit OK, you can see now that it says Techno is cool. Test. Okay, if I was to hit that button again and I was to change my name to Dan, you can see now that it has changed to Techno is cool Dan. Okay, so what you can see that's happening there is I'm using a few lines of code. It's storing a value, and then it is printing essentially that value to the screen is pretty much as it's in can't speak is it in its most basic form. And then the last bit of code that I've got down here is a very sort of simple bit of code, which is going to type out a specific section to the screen in a way that makes it look similar to a typewriter. So if I hit the typewriter button here, you can see that it's actually spelling out a sentence in a typewriter form. Okay, so if we just refresh the page, you can see that happening again. Now these are all examples of code that I've found through, I believe it was through the W3 Schools website. Okay, so W3 Schools had snippets of code. Okay, and they were very useful when it was looking to have a bit of help with understanding some of the basics of things like JavaScript. Okay, so I would recommend that if you wanted to learn a little bit more about JavaScript outside of the sessions, that you do take a look at W3 Schools, because they also have a series of exercises that you could try as well if you wanted to give them a go. Okay, lots and lots of different things that you can do, so it's worth taking a look at W3 Schools if you want a bit of extra reading. Okay, but of course make sure you're prioritizing your schoolwork. So as I mentioned earlier, what we're going to be doing today is, now that we've had a little bit of an introduction to JavaScript, we're going to just be covering this, okay, which is an alert, which is this thing that comes up when I click on my menu, navbar, elements. It gives me a prompt that says, are you sure you want to follow this link? And then of course, like I said, if there was something linked to those, it would then let me link to that website or that point in the page. But the idea is that we are given an alert to tell us to ask us essentially, do we actually want to do the thing that it's saying that we can do. So heading back over to index.html on my my Carnarvon Castle page. Now I'm going to be using the JavaScript section here. Okay, so this is going to be my JavaScript section. So I'll be using this specific menu, but what I want you to bear in mind here is that if you are editing locally, okay, and you are editing in something like Visual Studio Code, or if you are using just a simple text editor, okay, then I would suggest that you open up a new you'll need to open up a new project or a new document in order to run your JavaScript, and you will then need to link it in your head tag, okay, using a script tag. Okay, so you will have to use a script tag in order to link the pages together. So I'll see if I can find an example of that for you. Let's have a look. Here we go. So W3 Schools again have got an example here of what I mean. So I'll post a link to that in the Discord for you. So you can use what's known as a script tag, and then providing that everything's a part of the same directory, you can then just simply type src for the source, the name, okay, so if everything's in the same folder, I should say, you would type src for source equals, and then my javascript.js or whatever your JavaScript script file is called, and then close the script tag. Okay, so it looks something like that. So that's just an exact, that if you are editing locally, you will need to do that to link up like you've done with CSS, except instead of using the link tag, you're using the script tag. Okay, and that's how you can link those two web pages together. Does anybody have two documents together? Before we actually go on to actually programming JavaScript, I know I've done a lot of talking again this week, and I apologise. But does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask before we move on? No? Okay. Super. So, as I mentioned, we are going to now look at an example of JavaScript, and this is a this is 2 lines of code. Okay, so it's not a lot, but we'll work through it together. We'll work through it so that we can understand what's actually happening as we're working our way through. Okay. Okay. So I would also recommend as well that if you are looking into JavaScript things, that you do again make use of things like W3 schools and things like that to find a little bit of extra information out, or if you wanted to read around the subject a little bit more, because they have some very useful resources which help to explain to you exactly what's going on with every bit of, with the lines of code that they have on there. Okay. Now, what you have to do with JavaScript is essentially you have to actually get your websites or your HTML elements linked up to your JavaScript. Okay. I'm just going to have a look to see if I have an example of that in my other piece of code, because I don't know if I do. So I think I've just gone with the query selector in this case. Oh no, I have got an example here. So there are 2 sort of things that you can do in order to link your HTML up to your JavaScript. So once you've linked the script tags to get the JavaScript script to your HTML document, you need a way of actually telling the JavaScript document what elements from the HTML document you're referring to. Okay? And so you can do that. The more traditional way that you can do that is you can actually use something known as document.getElementById, okay, which is this bit of code here. And essentially what you would do is you would give something a name, an ID, okay, within your HTML. So like here, I have given this button an ID, okay, and an ID can be linked to the JavaScript document so that you're able to link resources together. Okay. The alternative, as I've got at the top of the screen here, is to use the query selector, which I believe is where we would say what element we want to actually refer to from our HTML document. Now the problem with this is that, of course, I am saying specifically that I want it to refer to the UL, okay, to our unordered list. And of course the problem with that is that if I had multiple unordered lists throughout my document or throughout my web page, it would mean that each one of them, okay, would end up having a prompt with the same thing if you were to click on it. So subsequently, it might be worth using the document.getElementById solution as an alternative, but as a good start point, we're going to stick with the query selector. Okay, so essentially that was kind of what you needed to know in terms of how you could link the 2 websites to the elements from your HTML into your JavaScript. So we're going to stick with the query selector version for now. So I'm going to say document.querySelector, and again this is written in camel case, so remember 2 words together, but the second word has got a capital letter at the start of it so that you can see that it's meant to be 2 words. And I'm going to grab my UL, okay, so from my HTML, and then I'm going to use this button called on this facility called on click, which I think is quite self-explanatory in the sense that what that means is when you click on the button, when you click on a specific part of the page, it's going to say, it's going to do something. Okay. Now, if we're thinking back to that code that I had with Minecraft, I now need to actually set up a function. Okay. And you can see that we're using, once again, like with CSS, we're using this idea of curly brackets to divide up our content so that we know what is going with what within our document. Now, we've set up a function, and there's a really useful keyword that we can use in order to tell our website that it needs to display a message when we click on a specific link, and that's known as an alert. Okay, and the alert is what came up on that other website example that I had earlier, where when I clicked on one of the links it says, are you sure you want to follow this link, yes or no? Okay, well, it just said okay actually, but are you sure you want to follow this link? Now you can customize what the alert tells you by putting 2 rounded brackets, and then between 2 quotes, okay, between quotation marks, you can then say what you would like your website to tell you when you click on one of those hyperlinks, okay, or one of those links from the navbar. So, for example, so on the other website, I said, "Are you sure you want to follow this link?" It might be that I'm saying something like, "You will now be redirected to another page." Okay. And so I am now giving the user of the website that prompt that essentially is telling them that now that they've clicked on that link, they are going to be taken to another part of the website. Now, again, this isn't something that you see particularly often, okay? Or it would be quite frustrating trying to use a website where when you click on a button or a link, it brings up a warning every single time that you click on it that you're being redirected. Okay, it'd be quite frustrating. But if you think about it in the context of certain websites, sometimes you do get messages like that that says you will now be redirected to an alternative site or something like that. Okay. So now that I have put this bit of code in, if I now click on one of these links, it is telling me you will now be redirected to another page. If I click OK, it would then, in theory, take me to that page. Now, if we test it out, I'm not sure if this will work, but it's worth a try. Let's just say that we wanted to learn a little bit about, let's have a look. So let's link to somewhere on the Visit Wales website. So let's say what could we do? Let's find an example. What could we do? Trying to think of a good example of something, see if there's anything that we can choose. What could we choose? What could we choose? Okay, let us just say that we wanted to link to the Visit Wales website. So let's just make a new list item actually. So we'll say list item anchor href is equal to, and then between the two quotes I'm going to put a link to the Visit Wales website. Okay, so I'm going to just copy and paste the link to their website into there, and then we're going to call that, we're going to say Visit Wales website. Okay, you can see now that that link has now appeared. So then I'm going to just close my anchor, oops, and close my list item. Okay, there we go. And now that I have now put a href here, okay, a link to the Visit Wales website. If I click on that, it says you will now be redirected to another page. Now, unfortunately, because I'm trying to load it in CodePen, it's not quite working as planned. Okay, because I'm trying to launch it in CodePen. But let's try a different example. So let's try let's link to this specific website. Oops. So let's see if I can find a link for this website. Whoops. So if I was to link to this website, change that to Dan's website, for example. You can see that it's loaded up the CodePen to the other website down here. Looks a bit strange, I know, but there you go. Okay, but did you all notice that when I clicked the link, it brought up a message saying you will now be redirected to another page, clicked OK, and then it directed me to that specific page. Okay, so those are just some examples of that's just a very basic example of JavaScript. We will look at some more JavaScript next week. Okay, so we'll look at how we can introduce that changeable title, and how we can introduce that typewriter text as well. Okay, and then for the final web design session, so after today we have 2 more sessions on web design, we will then have a chance to do one more little bit of JavaScript, and then we'll hopefully have an opportunity to start sharing our websites with each other. Okay, so we'll hopefully have a chance then to start sharing websites with each other, so that we can actually see what we've been working on over the last few weeks. Okay, so the last so we have 25 minutes left of the session now. Again, I apologise for having to speed through things because we started slightly late. But what I'll do, I'll just summarise what we've just been discussing about JavaScript, okay, by going through the code that's on the screen. And then for the remaining part of the session, what we'll do is we will spend some time just having a bit of a Q&A and continuing to populate our websites. Okay, so to summarise what we've just been discussing about JavaScript, the document.querySelector UL line here is essentially saying that we are grabbing the unordered list from our HTML. And as you can see, I'm using an unordered list. I'm saying UL, and I'm saying that when it is clicked, I want this function to run, which is going to be an alert that brings up a message saying you will now be redirected to another page, which, as we've seen, that's what it does. And as soon as we click on the button, it brings up this bit of text, and that essentially is all that these two, technically 3 lines of code are doing. Okay. If I was to give my, let's just say that I was to give an ID. It's actually no, we won't do that. But essentially, as I mentioned earlier, you can have an ID document. You can use document.getElementById, or, although it is not recommended, you can get things by class as well. Okay, but it is not recommended that you do that. But you can get things via their class name. So you could say documents.get elements by class name, and then I could say main menu. And in theory, this should do exactly the same thing, but I don't know if it'll work actually, because it's not recommended that you use by class name. Yeah, it didn't want to work, but that's okay. So, but it is possible to get things by class name as well, but it's better to stick to trying to just use the IDs, okay, if you've specified them, and we'll look at those next week, so don't worry if you've not got anything with IDs just yet. Okay, so as I mentioned, we have got around 20 minutes left of today's session. Does anybody have any questions that they want to ask at this point? Again, I apologise, I know today has been quite a heavy theory-based lesson, okay, so I apologise for that. But I thought you all might like to learn a little bit about media queries, because they are they're quite handy, okay. And as well, of course, I thought it'd be nice to give a little bit of a brief introduction to JavaScript before we look at it in a bit more detail next week. Okay. So for the last 20 minutes of today's session, what we'll do is we'll open it up to being a Q&A period. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, they're welcome to ask. And what I'll do in a few moments is I'll just recap on what I discussed at the start of the live stream, which was of course on what's going to be happening with the coding clubs in a few weeks. But in the meantime, if you'd all like to just carry on with your websites, okay, so just kind of carry on with the websites, carry on populating them, and remember to also, if you can, if you have been building up those project files that I've been talking about last week, then feel free to continue to populate those project files with anything that you want to include on your website, anything that you want to maybe take away, anything that you want to that you've added, okay. So just so that will be what we'll do for the rest of today's stream, okay. I'm sure you've all made I'm sure all of your websites are coming along very nicely. I know a lot of you have already produced some really high quality looking websites. probably looking a lot nicer than mine. Okay. In other exciting news, I am actually getting 2 monitors. I have a new monitor coming tomorrow, so I'm going to actually be dual monitoring, which is exciting. I've only ever had one monitor before, but I've actually ordered a new one, so that's exciting. I've heard that a lot of people have said once you've had 2 monitors, you will never go back to using just the one monitor ever again. So I'm quite excited about having my secondary monitor coming. Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm also still a little. There's a lot of things that I'm still learning with web design. So I would recommend, if you are interested, since I am only covering some of the really sort of basic concepts, I would suggest, if you wanted to learn more, to definitely take a look at W3 Schools or other resources online like Mozilla. I've got some good web design stuff as well. Because they will teach you a lot more than what I can. So I would certainly recommend that you take a look at some of those websites. So well worth taking a look at some of those. I'll leave the JavaScript code up on the screen just in case some of you wanted to take a look at that and add some of that to your websites. In fact, I will put on the screen the alternative website that I've designed with the JavaScript and the Google Fonts code. Okay, because I know that some of you might be interested in including some Google Fonts on your website. So if any of you wanted to include some Google Fonts, remember that you can do that by going to the Google Fonts website, linking some of them into your head of your HTML, and then you can style them then in CSS. Okay, and remember that fonts have got an order of essentially priority, so you would tell your website that you wanted to go start with looking to see if it has Jews, Fin, Sans in its library. Okay, and then if it doesn't, then it could default to another font, and then another font, and another font. But in this case, I've just said if this font isn't available, I'd like it to go straight to being sans serif. And if you are using Google Fonts, they will give you the necessary link tags to put in your head, as well as CSS code to put in your CSS document as well. Okay. So I will leave both of those up on the screen for you. Okay. Okay. So to just kind of wrap up on today, really, of course, what we've learned today is a little bit of CSS, media queries, again, just the basics, and we've also touched upon JavaScript, and we'll be looking at JavaScript in a lot more detail next week, and we'll be continuing to add elements to our JavaScript pages so that we can build up a slightly more exciting website. Okay. I will just quickly summarize again, now that I remember what the information is. I will quickly just summarize with you all again what's actually going to be happening with the coding clubs. So feel free to jot this down if you wanted to. Okay. But essentially what's going to be happening is we are still carrying on as normal for the time being. So I'm still hosting a session on a Wednesday afternoon, and Jack will still be hosting his session on a Thursday. Okay. And then after half term, which I know is coming up quite quickly, what's going to be happening then is we're going to be moving on to the new kind of program. So what's going to happen is there will be 3 different coding clubs that you can be a part of. So there'll be one with Jack on a Monday, there'll be one that's run by Cardiff University on a Wednesday, and there's going to be one that's run by me on a Friday. Okay, and what you will be allowed to do is choose a session that you want to be a part of. Okay, so you can be a part of different sessions, and I'm going to be kind of doing a little bit more sort of basic things, so I'm going to probably be looking at Scratch and Gamefruit and that sort of thing. Jack's going to be doing some slightly different things, okay, and then Cardiff University is going to be doing different things again. So you can choose a session that you're going to be a part of, and then in addition to that, we're also going to be having a twice weekly what we're calling Techno Live session. So these are going to be either on a Tuesday with me or a Thursday with Jack, and what we're going to be doing are one-off sessions each week, so a different topic every week. And I'm not quite sure what we're going to be doing in my sessions just yet, but we will be looking at different topics every week. And as well, they will be an hour long. Okay, so the sessions with me on a Tuesday and Jack on a Thursday, the Techno Live sessions, are going to be held between 4:30 and 5:30, and the Techno clubs, which are with Jack on a Monday, Cardiff University on a Wednesday, or me on a Friday, are going to be running from 4:30 until 6:30. Okay, so there is going to be a little bit of a change in the time that the Techno clubs will be run as well. Okay, so that's just to give you a little bit of information there on what's going to be happening. So again, we will release information on what was going to be going on in terms of content in each one of the sessions in the future. Okay, once we have a bit more of an idea of what type of content we're going to be doing, we will let you know what that's going to be and where you can go to find it. And we will again be releasing slightly more information about it in due course, and once some final details have been made, we will then let you know how you can access the resources and things like that. Okay, so don't worry, like I said, if you didn't take any of that in, because we will go through things again at a later date. Okay. So has anyone got any questions about either the new Techno Club / Techno Live sessions or today's work that they wanted to ask? No? Okay, that's okay. So remember, Techno Clubs, Techno Live, you'll be a part of a club, but that doesn't mean that you can't also join in the Techno Live sessions. Okay, they're going to be there for you to be a part of. Okay. The Techno Club sessions are going to be similar to how we've been running things over the last few weeks. So how we will start a project and we will build on that project week upon week upon week. Okay, like we've been building our websites, we built something in Minecraft, we built up a game in GameFruit. It'll be a similar kind of concept. Okay. And this is whilst in the Techno Live sessions, what we will be doing is we'll be hosting different topics every week. So it's not going to necessarily be a project, but it'll be more of a it'll be a different topic that we run with every week. Okay. Okay. So if nobody has any more questions, we'll finish a little bit earlier today. If nobody has any more questions that they want to ask. Remember, we do keep an eye on the Discord during the week, so if anybody does have a question, we'll try our best to answer. Okay. We might not be able to answer straight away, but of course we'll always do our best to get back to you all as soon as we can. Thank you all sort of very, very much again for joining in and for participating in today's session. Okay. Hopefully you've all enjoyed and you've learned something new about media queries and of course JavaScript. As I said, the plan for next week is we will start to go through a little bit more JavaScript. We'll start building into our programs a bit more JavaScript to kind of get used to things a little bit more. We'll learn a bit more about how we can structure more extended pieces in JavaScript to make our websites do some exciting things, like the whole changing customizable headings, having that typewriter font, okay, using buttons, things like that. Okay, these are all sort of concepts that we'll go over next week. Okay. But until then, if no one has any questions, I will end the stream there. Joe, I'm going to just move over to Techno Team briefly. Okay. But other than that, I will speak to you all next week. Thank you very much.